So for those who haven't heard of me before, I'm Australian, although I live in London, so a lot of people get quite confused by that. But yeah, I guess my journey into gut health began, 30,
Oh,
how old
you're
am I?
young.
34 years ago, when I grew up on a farm in
Oh,
Australia,
okay.
actually, in Cairns. Playing in the dirt, eating fresh fruit and veg, all that sort of stuff. But actually, it was when I was in my final year studying nutrition and dietetics in Brizzy. When I had, I guess, my first conscious encounter with the gut. And that's when I lost my grandma to bowel cancer. And, I was really close with her. And, bowel cancer is the third biggest cancer killer in the world. So I hated the gut. I was like,
Yeah.
it put her through the chemo, the surgery. I was like, F you, gut. Like, I don't like you at all. But then, I kind of suppressed that, started working as a dietitian, both in the hospital setting with all different types of conditions, whether it was mental health issues, weight management, different cancers, kidney disease, but also I was very fortunate to be the nutritionist for the Australian Olympic synchronized swimming team. And that was an incredible experience because what it showed me is that despite people's background, whether they were, really chronically ill or elite athletes, they're all coming to me complaining of the gut. And I was like, what is it about this organ? And I know, and you've obviously got this long standing history with it. I was like, it literally is haunting me. So that's when I decided to essentially throw away my early 20s and do a PhD in the area to look at whether we target the gut through the right nutrition, whether that can not just improve the health of or the prevention of things like gut symptoms, like I'm sure we'll go into a lot of detail, but also things like improve people's mental health, their skin health, their heart health, and all these factors. And what it showed is that actually the gut was just very misunderstood. It has so much power and potential if we look after it and if we use the right kind of
Yes.
techniques that are backed by science, we can make the most of this landmark scientific discovery, right? And that's when I decided to move to the UK, because there was an amazing research group, King's College in London, where I continue to work as a research fellow there, where we do all different types of nutrition interventions and look at how they impact the gut, whether it is things like IBS or Sibo or things like inflammatory
Yeah.
bowel disease, as well as things like mental health. So yeah, that's
Well, you're
me in a
amazing, and she's
nutshell.
won awards too, by the way, guys. She's not saying that. It's like by Queen Princess Anne. Am I getting this right? I can't remember everything that I wrote.
Yeah, no,
Just
you've
do my
done your
stalk.
stalking. I know. I mean, it was the most nerve-wracking thing, and I was like, I don't even know how to curtsy. Being a typical Australian who's so ignorant to that sort of stuff. I was like, Mom, what do I do? And my mom kind of was like, obviously Australian as well, but she was like, I
Oh,
think this is how you do it. We Googled it and stuff like that. But she was
yeah, I saw the
lovely. It
picture.
was,
You had a
yeah,
sore hand.
it
It
was
was
such
all
an amazing
bandaged up.
experience. You know what happened?
Of
Kombucha. I
course
was
you were.
blinking making kombucha. And yeah, I mean, practicing what I preach, and the glass broke, and like I still have a cut on my
Ah,
hand. So I was like, oh my God, my one opportunity to
yeah.
meet the Royals, and I've
So you
got
had to
this
shake with the
huge
other hand.
bandage. But
Did
anyway,
you? Do you have to shake? Yeah.
yeah,
But yeah,
exactly.
Megan's
I did, yeah.
amazing. She's helping me with my gut. I've been following her for years. She's one of the most well-known gut health experts there is, and doctor who's actually a scientist. Not, there's a lot of, not to bag on anyone, but there's a lot of people out there that really don't know what they're talking about and they shouldn't be talking about it. And I've been through a lot of them. And there's fads out there that are like people misconstrue like information. There's I mean, you can talk more on this, but there's so many things out there that are just incorrect information and it's making people worse. And I've been down that hole as well. So
Yeah.
now I've got the best working with me. We're just at the beginning stage. I've got to do some tests and things like that before we can sort of start the whole, I don't know whether you call it a protocol or what, but before we can get it moving. But we want it to be a lifestyle. So I don't really
Yeah,
like the word
the
protocol
process,
because it
yeah.
sounds like it's a short-term thing. I don't know. Yeah, so
Yeah.
yeah, and we
Yeah,
thought
it definitely,
we'd
it's
get
a
on here
journey.
and because I'm doing consults obviously online with Megan, I could talk a little bit, if you guys want it, a little bit about my issues and what we're doing, maybe just a real brief sort of thing where we're at now, and then we can move on to some Q&As and I'll try and go through and read them out to you if that makes it easier. Yeah. So
Yeah, and I think it's so important, and you're very brave for sharing your story because like I see, as well as working as a
yeah,
scientist, I still work as a clinician. So I see, so many patients and clients come through the door and they've hidden their gut struggles for so long,
oh yeah,
despite it having this huge impact on their well-being, like people not wanting to leave the house, people not being able to, you know, be the best parent they could be, or not being able to excel in their career because of this quite crippling gut condition that, because it's not visible to the human eye, people don't understand it can be a disability. So I think you're very brave for speaking up and sharing your story.
You.
So please,
Very, very common.
give
I
us a bit
found
of an
it's getting
overview.
even more common. So I'll try and do this briefly, but I can talk. So back when I was a teenager, I did, which I've spoken about before, I did try to end my life by drinking a heap of straight vodka, and I took Panadeine 4, which is terrible for the esophagus. I mean, we won't go right into that because it's obviously horrible, and I should say it's triggering for you guys. Sorry, I should have said that. And that, yeah, may have damaged my, not only lining, but I've got a sphincter that is faulty in my esophagus, which opens up into my stomach, which I found out when I was a teenager. So I'm not sure if that's caused issues now. So that is something to consider. And then for years, ever since I was a teenager, I've struggled. So it first started with reflux. Every morning I'd wake up dry reaching into the sink in the bathroom, feeling so sick. I could barely get out of bed, and everyone thought, oh, she just doesn't want to go to school. But I felt so sick. And sometimes I would cough up stuff, and it was the acid. And then as I got older, I was put on different medications like the acid blockers and things like that, like Nexium, for instance. Then I got older and I didn't want to be on something forever. I wanted to try, if I didn't have to, of course, I wanted to try through diet to see if I could manage it. And I thought I did. And I'm not sure. We were talking about with Megan the other day about whether I've got silent reflux, which could be something that's happening. It's just that I'm used to living with it. So it just seems normal for me. So we're going to probably do something where you put something, I'm going to explain this so wrong. It's on a piece of string. It's like a tablet that has feedback and sends information. So they put it down. You explain it. Oh my gosh.
It's perfect. So this is the gut, essentially. So it's this 9-meter long tube that delivers food from entry. The mouth, the head is here, and it goes down into your stomach there, and then into this section here called the small intestine, and then it goes finally into this large intestine, and then you poop it out. Now, so what Emily was talking about is we've got obviously the stomach here, and then there is the food pipe, i.e. the esophagus, and there's this little trap door that prevents the acidic acid that's in the stomach from popping up and burning that food pipe, the esophagus. So sometimes that little trap door can be a little bit leaky, and in turn the acid can go up and then burn the esophagus. So for some people, those symptoms, they've had them for so long, a little bit of like heartburn and acid coming up into their mouth, even a stinky breath, that they've kind of not really realized that it's as bad as what it is. So you've certainly had the endoscopy where they put an actual camera down to check your esophagus, and there was a little bit of kind of damage and burning there, and then that's why they recommended things like the Nexium, and then you know, you've tried to kind of wean off them and you felt like your reflux had actually improved. But just to be on the safe side, we want to check if there still is the acid building up, because it is important, given family history as well with you, to make sure that that's not happening, because it can, you know, cause damage to your
sadly
esophagus.
Passed away from esophageal cancer. And then like you, I've got, I'm pretty sure, I'm not too close with my dad's side of the family, but I know that I think it was my grandfather passed away of colon cancer, and my grandmother might have as well. It might have been that. She did have cancer, but she didn't speak about it, so I wasn't sure what it was. And again, I wasn't close to them. So it's just something to be aware of, you know. I mean, we all die of something usually. Hopefully it's just now sleep and we're happy. But I want to be on top of it, you know, and prevent things as much as I can, if I can. So we're going to do that, but that's probably a little bit down the track. I think the first thing we're going to do, which I've booked in an appointment, actually, I've got one with the doctor in a couple of days, and then I'll hopefully get a referral to a gastroenterologist, and then I'll get blood work done and rivaxamine. I'll probably get that because I may have Sibo, and I'd rather just treat that. I mean, you can explain this, but as far as I'm aware, and let's see how smart I am, it targets.
You're doing a lot of research.
Small intestines without doing whole body, instead of killing off every bacteria there is, which is not something I want to do. It'll target the small intestines. Is that right? So we can get rid of it.
So rifaximin, like you said, it's a type of antibiotic, and I think The history of antibiotics, everyone knows that they're not great for the gut microbiome because it can kill off not just the bad ones, but also some good ones. But there's many different types of antibiotics. And in terms of Sibo, SIBO stands for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So just for those who don't know, but essentially what can happen is we literally have like trillions of microbes, not just the bacteria, but even some like fungi and yeast, which actually live mostly in the large intestine, this fat tube here, right? But what can happen is that, again, there's a little trap door that connects or that stops the bacteria from crawling back up the small intestine. So from the large intestine to the small intestine, right? There's a little trap door there. So that as well can get a little bit dysfunctional. And what happens, it allows some of these microbes to crawl up into the small intestine, which, like the esophagus, is a bit more sensitive to bacteria and fungi kind of fermenting and releasing gas and stuff there. And then in turn, that can aggravate the intestine, and that's what we call SIBO, so small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So instead of them keeping down here where they should and they do their best work there, they crawl up here. So in terms of the diagnosis of that, it's quite a complex one, really. So we do know that unlike a lot of the other breath tests that aren't overly valid, you can get breath tests for SIBO. However, I think this is a really important disclosure. It's not as black and white as we've been led to believe. You can get a lot of these, false positives or false negatives. So it's not a case of, oh, look, I've got a positive test, therefore I must have SIBO. It needs to be correlated with symptoms and things like that. So what happens often if we don't have access and it's kind of not the best marker for people, if we speak to the gastroenterologist often, or maybe your GP, depending on which country you're in, they will prescribe this specific type of antibiotic called rifaximin, and that's the one that's got the most scientific evidence for SIBO. So it's quite a targeted one, so it has a lot less side effects than a lot of these other ones. But certainly, because it is a medication, we don't just go off and do it for the sake of it. We want to look at, ruling out a lot of other causes of bloating, whether it's things like having excess amounts of fruit all in one sitting, or if it's having a lot of these like sugar-free lollies, which can cause a lot of the bloating, or having a lot of fruit juices and those sorts of things. We look at the kind of the low-hanging fruit first. We call them first-line therapies, but Em's been through all of that. We've gone through a lot of detail. So that's why we're looking at the kind of this more serious next step of the rifaximin. And essentially that's been shown to be effective in about 70% of people, of killing off the bacteria that have crawled that little bit higher. And then we also combine it with let's hope that's it. But the thing is, and we've definitely discussed it though, is that there is quite a high relapse rate. So although for about 3 months people do get really good benefits, if we don't think about why this little trap door was leaky, but connecting that large intestine and the small intestine, the bacteria can essentially crawl back up there, right? So we just need to have that better understanding. But it can be really helpful. Exactly. And then that's when we've got more of the slow systematic reintroduction and those neuromodulators that we spoke about, in terms of kind of reducing the sensitivity of the gut.
Explain just briefly what a I can't say it. Neuromodulator. There you go.
Look at that. Yeah. So again, this is kind of higher level stuff that once you've gone through and you've done a lot of the lifestyle and dietary strategies, then we look at the other steps if people like gut symptoms really are being quite burdensome for them. So when we talk about the gut, a lot of people have started to hear about this two-way connection between the gut and the brain. So this is called our gut-brain axis, essentially. So we literally have hundreds of millions of nerves that connect our gut and our brain. So they work in synergy, essentially. And that's why, if you are a bit nervous, sometimes people feel it in their gut, right? They get a bit of, butterflies or excitement even, often we get excited in our belly, and that's just that thing at play, right? But what can happen, and this is what we see certainly in irritable bowel syndrome, is that this gut-brain connection can be dysfunctional. And it can be dysfunctional for a number of different reasons. So we know that if you go away abroad and you get barley belly or, a gut infection, and you come back home, you've got a threefold increased risk of getting IBS, because the bacteria or the viruses, whatever you kind of ingested, can alter the messages that go from your gut to your brain. So it can harm the nerves endings. Like in your case, if you abuse your body and you have too much of certain substances, again, that can damage those millions of nerve endings that connect your gut and your brain, right? So that can make the whole system a bit dysfunctional. And then other people is actually, it might not be ingesting anything. It could just be
Yeah,
chronic trauma or chronic stress. So if you've had a
yeah,
really
stress. I was
traumatic
going to
background,
say,
right?
stress can cause so many gut issues, and I think if that's not addressed when you're trying to figure out what's going on with your gut, then you got to go and find someone else, because it's part of it holistically, and it's in your book too. A lot of like stress relieving things, and you're getting
Yeah.
me to do my diaphragmatic breathing before and after eating my meals. It's hard with kids and businesses, but I do my best.
Yeah.
I just go, I'm like, oh yeah, take a
Good,
breath, that'll
good.
do. And chewing
Chew,
properly,
chew,
actually
chew,
spending
good.
time on each
Yeah.
mouthful, breaking it down so that it's into a sort of, or not liquefied, but into a smoother sort of liquid that can go down and break down more easily. Because we do not chew our food enough. Most of us don't. I mean, when we crack.
We don't. And we've got those digestive enzymes in the mouth, right? And then I feel like people then go, oh, I just need to take more digestive enzymes. You're like, no, 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 your body
Yeah,
produces enough. A very, very minor number of people don't produce enough, but vast majority of us, including those with gut symptoms, do produce enough. We just don't make the most of it, like the chewing. So we have digestive enzymes in our mouth, and therefore we need to start that chewing process. And exactly right in terms of stress. I mean, like we said at the start, I'm a scientist by background, so I was a bit like, I guess, skeptical of, doing this mindfulness. Is it a bit hippy dippy and all that sort of stuff? But actually, there is really good scientific evidence out there that shows things like gut directed hypnotherapy, mindfulness,
yep.
and the diaphragmatic breathing and things like that. Actually, mechanistically can really help with these gut symptoms. There's a lot of science behind it. A lot of people think, oh,
Absolutely.
it's, just another one of those, hippy dippy things. But trust us that, it does work. You just do have to sadly commit to it for around 3 months. It kind of takes to kick in a lot of those
Yeah,
gut brain strategies. And that's because, yeah, like we said, up here, if this is stress, even if it's subconscious, it literally, those
yeah,
100 millions of nerves strangle the gut. So no matter what you eat, the gut is going to be strangled, and you're
yeah.
not
And
going to
you're
be
in
able to
fight or
digest it
flight.
right. So that's
Like
really,
you're always stressed, you're in fight or
yeah,
flight all the time, and you
exactly.
can't digest when you're fighting and flighting.
It won't work. Yeah, absolutely. So these neuromodulators, what they do is they kind of, they're actually, a lot of them are antidepressants, right? But they're not used to help like with the normal kind of depressive symptoms people get. They're given at very low doses, so much lower than you would use for treating depression. And what that does actually, it looks at the desensitizing the enteric nervous system, which is those hundreds of millions of nerves essentially. So it allows these sensitive nerves, which is heightened in people with whether it's the Sibo, whether it's the IBS, to be able to kind of start to heal their gut and eat more variety of food without it triggering that gut pain or the cramping or the bloating, because the nerve endings aren't so sensitive. So this is the neuromodulator. So we don't give them straight
I was
away,
like,
of course.
give it to
We
me.
wait till we go through the
I was like,
processes, but
give
it's good.
it to me.
Like, give me
Give
now.
me everything. I'm over it.
But I always like to make sure, exactly. I know I mean, it's been a very long journey for you.
Yeah,
But we like to, because a lot of, I would say about 60% of people, we can heal their gut using these first line diet and lifestyle strategies in terms of the
yeah,
gut symptoms, right? But there is this subpopulation that are resistant to that, and therefore we go through whether we need to do the rifaximin level and then the neuromodulators as well, in terms of allowing that time to have a desensitized gut. Then we really rebuild the resilience, because I think people don't necessarily realize, but the gut is this big muscle, right? It's 9 meters of this big muscular tube. So what we notice, if it's kind of not been working very well, it kind of, the muscles have weakened in a way, kind of like going to the gym. And you're obviously an expert of, going through pregnancy and then having to
yeah.
rebuild your muscles, and your fitness and all that sort of stuff. Literally the same happens with the gut. You need to
Train it.
slow and gently rebuild your gut fitness. And I think a lot of people think, oh, my gut's not healthy at the moment, therefore I need to whack on all the fiber, whack on all the fermented foods. And it's kind of like doing a marathon when you haven't trained for it. You actually feel worse at the end of it because you haven't prepped your gut to be able to handle that.
Exactly. I just wanted to jump in for one sec because I saw a really good question here. And it's, can you explain why you chose to use the
Yeah.
antibiotic route over using herbal antimicrobials, which I have done many times, guys, and I keep relapsing. I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that this is such an important one. And yeah, and we should definitely get into people's
Yeah.
questions because we want it to be about them and not just
I mean, we can talk and talk and
kind of
talk.
me throwing information and people being a bit overwhelmed. Yeah, clearly, two Aussies, we could be here for hours. But yeah, let's get through the question. So, and yeah, like I said, a really important one because I think, and understandably, we are very anti-medication, and I get it. I think we antibiotics they historically have been overprescribed, and therefore that's leading to all this antibiotic resistance and stuff like that. So we shouldn't use them just for the sake
Yeah.
of it, right? However, I think in turn people have then gone down these herbal routes, and we need to be aware that herbs in these high doses can be incredibly toxic. So, a lot of them can act like antibiotics, but the thing is, it's not well regulated and the studies haven't been done. So there is a lot of side effects. And in fact, working, in kidney disease, a lot of my patients who had, damaged kidneys actually got it from having really high dose herbal supplements. And therefore they had to go on dialysis the rest of their life. So we need to be, I'm not talking about a bit of coriander and oregano in your food like that. I'm talking about these like, really intense ones that, some kind of, I would say, unevidence-based practitioners are prescribing for people. So, I really like to make sure that if I'm ever going to recommend something that's in high dose, whether it's, a medication or a herbal supplement, there has been rigorous safety tests done on it. And in terms of things like herbs in Sibo, there hasn't been those tests. So I've obviously, we wanted to look at all the different evidence out there for treating Sibo, and rifaximin is the one that's kind of the gold standard, the most scientific evidence. These herbal supplements haven't been tested for Sibo. So, like you found, and you've gone on so many courses, and I just wonder whether actually maybe that could be a bit of a vicious cycle. We don't know which ones are killing. Some of them can kill the beneficial bifidobacteria, which are anti-inflammatory. So we do need to be very careful. But
like
brilliant
it's hit or miss.
question.
We're just guessing and going, I'm just going to throw this in, and it could be way too much, which I may have done. I did feel good at one point last year when I did it. I took some herbal things, and they were capsules, and I was following this whole protocol, and I ended up feeling really good. And I had parasites apparently due to the stool test that I did, and SIBO, and I was able to eat salads and incorporate some more foods. But I've gone back there again and relapsed. So obviously there is a cause for this SIBO, if that's what I've got, and we need to find the cause so that we can fix it, long term. Because I don't want to keep going on these things all the time. Yeah, it's not living.
And no, and then also, and getting you back to a broad diet, right? Because I think we need to keep in mind that, people can go on these really restrictive diets and actually reduce down their symptoms, but live off like chicken and white rice and feel like their symptoms are at control. But actually what we're learning is our gut microbiome, those trillions of microorganisms, will predict things like our risk of, mental conditions in the future, heart conditions, kidney conditions, colon cancer, all that sort of stuff. So even if we're putting the gut symptoms at bay, we're not future preventing, as well as longevity, right? So the studies have shown that people with more diverse, healthy gut microbiomes live longer and happier. So, you need to be very careful of, just because your symptoms are under control, if you're not doing it in a healthy way, i.e. with a nice broad diet, you could be having all these other side effects that you might not experience for a decade. But when you're, in your 60s, you don't want to be crippled with all these conditions, regretting that over restriction that occurred.
That's what I was actually worried about, because I've been on a carnivore diet. Like I literally ate meat and I felt amazing. I had no bloating, no inflammation, felt incredible. But like you're saying, short term, sure. And I still believe short term, maybe it can be beneficial. And I'm not the gut doctor, but beneficial just to settle things. And then you can slowly incorporate more. But I don't believe it's good long term. That's just through everything that I've learned and what I've learned from you. And like you're saying, if 10 years, 20 years down the track, how are your organs? How are your kidneys? What's going on? So I don't want to risk that.
I know. Yeah, no, I mean that's a really good point. And the reason these plant-free diets work essentially is because the protein is absorbed very high up your intestine. So bringing up the model again. So most of the protein is absorbed very high up. So it doesn't get to this part here. So it doesn't actually feed your gut bacteria. And therefore, if you have this sensitive gut, it's not triggering it. Because when the bacteria ferment, beneficial things like fiber, they produce a little bit of gas, which is no issue normally. But if you've got that sense, all those nerves going like that little bit of gas can activate it. And therefore you can get the symptoms. And then you're like, oh my God, plants don't agree with me. When actually it's not the plant's fault. It's just that you've got that sensitive nerve lining. So essentially it's like putting a band-aid on the issue if you have these meat only diets. And if we look at all the science out there, they all show people who live, like the centenarians who live to 100 plus, really happy, amazing lives, they all have loads of plants in them. So like you said, in the short term, and that's kind of like a low fat diet for 4 weeks, yes, we'll cut out a lot of these healthy fiber foods to give that gut that rest, or more towards the carnivore sort of way of eating. But if you don't start to systematically reintroduce, you get stuck in this restrictive phase, which so many people do, really, really common. And then in the future you've really kind of killed off a lot of those healthy bacteria that are doing things like regulating your appetite hormones as well. So for weight management, like I said, your dopamine in your brain, serotonin, all this sort of stuff. So it is like really, really important that we don't just go, okay, I feel really good now, I'm just going to keep on this long term. It is a journey, and I know, I get it, it can be a frustrating journey, but you don't want to regret it, not trying to.
Because what I was doing as well was having to take things like sodium butyrate, because you can't get that from meat. You've got to eat plants to get it. My understanding is, I'm probably wrong, but I was having to supplement things, So I just think, like you're saying, diverse plants as well as heavy meat too. If you eat meat, that's how I want to do it. But I do want to have a plate full of all different color and variety, so I can get bacteria diversity and hopefully feel better.
Exactly. And you just mentioned this word called postbiotic. So I mean, should we go through people's questions so I can speak all day on the different, like, prebiotics, postbiotics, all that sort of stuff? While you're finding a few good ones, I'll just recap. What was that?
Yeah, I was just saying, are you looking at it, or am I looking too? We're both looking. Oh yeah.
We can do any. Okay. I will then just quickly, you said about the butyrate. So that's called the postbiotic. So people probably, get all of these words thrown at them. And a postbiotic essentially is the chemicals the bacteria produce. So the butyrate is one of them. But the thing is, the bacteria produce them where it's needed, i.e. here, right? But if you take it through a supplement, it has to go through all the acidic stomach, it has to go through the small intestine, actually it gets denatured. So it's unlikely to have the same therapeutic benefit if you take it via oral versus actually your bacteria producing it in the right spot.
So there's a question here. What is it? Hang on. I second the question above, but I can't find it now. What are your thoughts on acid inhibitors for infants with reflux?
Oh, good one. Yeah, I mean, reflux in bobs is so common because they're little sphincter, right? Yeah, you guys struggled with it a lot too, didn't you? Their little sphincter is still developing.
Yeah, maybe it's hereditary. Maybe I just had it.
So what I would, no, you know what? I mean, there is a lot of genetic factors into gut conditions. So when I'm consulting, I always make sure we ask ask your family, did your parents have issues with it as well? And that kind of just narrows things down a little bit. But yeah, so I mean, I don't want people just to go straight to the doctor and just get on it, but sometimes they do need it for a short period of time. What I would say is try to work closely with your doctor to ensure that bubs aren't on them unnecessary for very long periods of time. So maybe while it's kind of still developing and getting strong, they might need to go on if their doctor recommends it, but don't see it as a forever thing. And because we know that, if you are suppressing the acid long term, that could in turn have some, consequences in the future. But you do, absolutely need to get on it, because the whole, the pain that bub goes through, the effect of mum's mental health, of screaming child, all that sort of stuff can be really traumatic. So I would definitely not be afraid of it. but work
Yeah.
closely with your doctor.
Yeah. So there's a question here, and it is about rifaximin. I thought this was interesting. Lisa
Yeah,
said she feels worse
yeah.
and more bloated than ever, and that's I just finished 2 weeks, so it's been 2 weeks on it. Do I need to wait for it to work or repeat the dose? Sorry.
No, yeah. So I would definitely talk to the prescribing doctor about the rifaximin that you experienced that, because after 2 weeks, that is the full course, right? So I wouldn't recommend going straight back on another course if it hasn't worked in terms of your symptoms, and it looks like that the crawling up of the bacteria wasn't the issue. There must be something else at play. And your doctor can also think about, whether it's the fungal component, because rifaximin, it gets the bacterial component, but not the fungal
I had a
component.
question
So
related.
I wouldn't recommend just going on another dose because,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, it jumps in and out, and I think that you're finished, and I talk over you. I'm not trying to be rude.
No,
Um,
no, no,
would the
no.
rifaximin cause any die-off symptoms? Like, when you're killing the SIBO,
Yeah,
would
die-off
they have
symptoms
die-off?
are, yeah. Yeah, not really. I mean, I think the die-off symptoms are kind of over exaggerated. Um, it's not like an instant, sort of thing that people should notice, like, oh my God, this is the die-off kind of really bad phase, because it will be a gradual thing. If you're taking the rifaximin, again, there's the different doses,
Yeah.
and we talked about in terms of which your doctor would like to prescribe, whether it's 3 times a day, 2 times a day, and stuff like that. So they're starting to die off all the time. So you shouldn't actually notice,
Yeah.
this bad kind of symptom thing. I think that's over dramatized. Actually, by the 2 weeks, you should feel a little bit better, and then it might take an extra week or two to kind of feel more than that. But I would say that, yeah, I think the die-off symptoms is more of a theory rather
Right.
than what people should experience
Because
in
when I
practice.
did the herbal, like really crazy doses of herbal back in the day, and I felt so
Yeah,
sick. Is it because it's toxic levels of herbs, or is it die-off?
probably. Probably that. I would probably say it's a toxic. Your body, you may have done some harm to the other gut cells, and therefore that was probably what you're experiencing. But then a lot of the herbalist people may suggest it's
I
die
was like,
off when it's
wait.
probably, you rejuvenating
I
some
was
of the
like,
cells that you
shame, you're
killed. It's
dying.
kind of like chemotherapy, right? It's like these, yeah, like chemotherapy uses like these really high
Yep.
toxic drugs, and therefore people get nausea and all the symptoms, for a couple of weeks after that. That's because of the
Yeah.
drugs, not because of the die off.
Okay. Just looking at some more. Oh, there's lots and lots. Oh, I don't understand some of them. What do you think about?
Yeah, so I'll read out. You keep looking, and
Okay.
I'll read out a few in terms of, some people are asking about, really bad constipation. And interestingly, constipation is probably one of the most common gut issues that people experience. And the thing about constipation is it can be caused by so many different things. And a lot of people get told, oh, just have more fiber
Mm.
and fluid. But actually, that doesn't work for a lot of people. If you have more fiber, if it's not necessarily the right type of fiber, that can kind of block you up that little bit more. So in terms of the constipation, there's many different things. Obviously, we want to make sure you're having enough hydration, you're moving your body often, but it's also important to look about the types of fiber you're having. So if you're having loads and loads of just green leafy veggies, then that fiber is not as laxating as things like oats, or fiber from whole grains. And then there is actually some good evidence for things like psyllium husk, which is a non-fermentable fiber. So a lot of these fibers, the bacteria actually ferment down and can produce a little bit of extra gas, whereas psyllium husk, the bacteria can't actually break that gel form. So you get it online, really easy to access. And I would just start with like half a tablespoon, mix it into water, drink it down and have that once a day for a week. And then if you want to increase it, our clinical trials at King's have used up to 15 grams for treating constipation. But then there's other issues with constipation in terms of it might actually be your pooping position and stuff like that. So yeah, do chat to someone, or you can get the book Eat Yourself Healthy, where I've got a whole section on constipation and a flow diagram of what
You must
strategies to
all buy
follow.
that book.
And
Amazing.
did you find any other good ones that you wanted
Get it. It's been so helpful for me. I bought it and you were like, why'd you buy it? So
I'll
I
just
know.
send it to you.
That's
I
what you said.
mean,
And I'm like, no.
yeah, no, I mean, I have actually, it is actually available for free in some Australian libraries, because I
No.
just hate, I don't want it to be a selling thing. Literally the whole point of, me even getting onto social media, because I'm not a social media person, is to help people feel better, because I just see so much unnecessarily struggles
Yeah.
and people taking advantage of. And one question I just see coming up here is around all these food
Yes.
intolerance tests.
I was going to ask that.
And like, I don't know if you want to share your, yeah, but it literally is such a scandal kind of
Yeah.
space, all these food
I've had
intolerance
many.
tests, because, the World Immune Association have said that they're not valid. But do you want to share your
Well,
kind of
I have
journey with the
had
different
I've
testing?
had many, like the IgG and IgA tests, which you guys may have heard of. I think one's allergies, one's meant to be sensitivities, and there's the timing of it too, isn't it? Delayed sensitivity. I don't know. You're the expert. I don't know why I'm talking about this.
Yeah,
But yeah, I've
yeah.
done all the tests. But even
It's good.
years ago, like I've probably done 10 of them. Years ago, I did it, and then I couldn't eat all these things. Like I had everything in the red, and I was like, oh, I can't eat this, can't eat that. And mind you, I ended up getting, it was like a food, an eating disorder in a way, because I was afraid of certain foods. And if I did happen to eat it, I'd get more scared, which makes it worse, you know? So I had these lists of it, and then I'd go and
Yeah,
get another one and go, oh shit, add that one to the list now, and this too. What can I eat? And I keep getting them, right? Thinking this is what I need to do. And there's nothing left. Like there was nothing left on the list of what
yeah,
I can eat. And then there's like,
yeah,
they add herbs to it. Like there's different ones that you can do and the amounts that you can get done. And that's only
yeah, yeah,
testing at that time, isn't it? And it may not be that particular food. It may be that maybe you're having like a lot of allergies that day. I was reading about like when you're in a state of and you're not processing your, is it the DAO? Um,
yeah. So that's for
yeah, that can
histamine
cause like if
intolerance.
you're
Yeah,
having
yeah.
a thing and you eat it,
So
then that food's going to come up as one apparently that you can't have.
yeah, so I mean,
Oh,
it's just such a, yeah, unfair space, because so many people, so what you spoke about was that nocebo effect. So remember, there is the placebo effect, whereas if you think you're taking something that's meant to be good for you, you can physically feel better, and the nocebo effect is literally the opposite of that. So if you are told that something is bad for you, i.e. you get these tests and it says dairy is bad for you or gluten is
yeah.
bad for you, then what that does is up here tells your brain that is a
Mm,
danger food. And therefore, when you ingest it, you can physically manifest symptoms. And this isn't because you're crazy or anything like that. It's
yeah.
your body's way of protecting you. And I've shared the example of food poisoning, right? So if you go and have, a prawn curry and you get food poisoning, a lot of people can never touch prawns again, even if they know the new prawns are not going to, are not bad. It's because that association, the body's protecting you. So the nocebo effect is completely normal, completely safe, but it really does exist. So in terms of those food intolerance tests, like you said, they play on some science. So there is the IgE test that some of them are valid for testing certain types of allergies, like peanut allergy, for example. So that's completely legitimate, all normal, and definitely recommend getting that done if your clinician suspects that's what you have. But then there is this group called IgG tests. And that's what I think a lot of these food tests, and certainly one that you've had, kind of play on. And they are trying to position themselves as helping identify if you've got a food
Yeah.
intolerance. But it's completely invalid, because what it does actually is measures your ingestion of that over multiple episodes. So it's not that you've got an intolerance to it, it's just that you've eaten that in your diet at some stage. So it's completely invalid. And I see them all the time, the red list, the green list, and they play off the low FODMAP diet. So they literally randomly pull them together, which is why if you repeat the same test, a month apart, you'll get different answers, because it's such a fraudulent thing. Like it's just not something that, yeah, people should be being fooled by it is really unfair, but it's just unregulated, to be honest. So they can kind of get away with it, but definitely don't go through them. In terms of food intolerances, apart from lactose intolerance, so that is intolerance to milk sugar, that's found in things like, you know, your yogurts and your cow's milk and stuff like that. There is no valid food intolerance, like a test. The way we diagnose it in clinical practice is this 3R process. So you would record what you're eating and your symptoms. If we see a correlation with the food, might be gluten, might be something else, histamines, we would then restrict it for 2 to 4 weeks, depending on what it was. And then the really important one is we would reintroduce that suspected culprit in a blinded manner to make sure that it wasn't just a chance finding that you feel better. And we would try reinstate those symptoms, and that's the way we do it in clinical practice, which, you know, can be quite frustrating in terms of it is again that process, but you know, it's what needs to be done in terms of the true diagnosis. Otherwise you get pulled into all these really dodgy things and you restrict down your diet, and it can just ruin people's gut health.
There's a question
just so unfair
here about histamine, and I'm interested in this as well. What do you know about histamine intolerances? As I've been told not to eat so many things because of this, and I'm the same. Like, I've been reading about this is prior to talking to you, reading about it, and I'm like, okay, here's the the lower histamine foods and foods that don't cause histamine, a reaction or whatever in your body, and here's the low FODMAP. What's left? Because I would have to go and catch my fish and straight away for it to not have histamine. Like, what on earth is it? Is it like
exactly.
Is there such a thing?
I know.
I don't know.
Yeah. Really good question. So the truth is that you can have a histamine intolerance. However, it's not as common as we've been led to believe. And the thing that we need to keep in mind is that our gut bacteria can produce histamine, and a tomato, you know, produced from one shop could have a different amount of histamine compared to a tomato from another shop. So it's a very, very confusing space. And I would definitely not recommend people, you know, go straight to, oh, it must be histamine in terms of what they're experiencing. So if they're getting the symptoms of histamine is like the runny nose, the hives when they eat certain foods, and the really high ones is things like, you know, fermented foods actually. So if you get them really bad when you have canned, it's like sauerkraut and kimchi and dried fish and tuna and all that canned fish and stuff like that. If it's really specific to those foods, you only really get the symptoms then it's a case of going, oh, actually this could be histamines. But if it's kind of like, well, actually I'm not getting symptoms with some really high histamine foods, but I'm getting symptoms of some that are medium histamine foods, then it's probably unlikely to be a histamine intolerance. It needs to be very kind of targeted. So yeah, just being cautious again, not going down that histamine route too early, and ensuring you're speaking to a specialist.
I have a question talking about the fermented foods, and obviously we know they're great for us and we are told eat more. I have a lot of trouble being able to have it without blowing up and getting cramps, right? And I am incorporating a little bit of red cabbage, what's it called? Red cabbage, the sauerkraut.
Kimchi?
They just go in and out. I call it baby brain. You do that when they're like 3 and 5. Anyway, so I'd have the red cabbage because it's supposed to be slightly lower in FODMAPs, because I'm still kind of looking at that just while things are a bit crazy, and then I'm introducing over a period of time more FODMAP foods. But when I'd have it, like any of those fermented foods, I get so sick. Is that just because it is a higher FODMAP food, or is it because it's histamine?
Yes. Yeah. So it's more, how do you go with things like canned tuna and canned fish?
I started having a bit of
with them?
salmon. It's Alaskan wild caught salmon in a tin, just because the time to cook all the food, I just need something that's quick. And I think I've been okay. But
convenient,
because, you know, when I was sick for like a month, I got really bad. My gut was the worst it's ever been, and it's still not great. I did start incorporating that, you know, during that time. So it's hard to pinpoint, is it that's causing it? Because every time I eat, you know, I'm getting bloating, and I'm just trying to do the breathing and just get through it. So I'm not sure. I'd have to actually eliminate other stuff, eat that, see how I go over the hours, you know.
Yeah, no, I don't. Unless it's kind of like quite an obvious thing, I wouldn't think that it's the histamine at play, to be honest. I think what's happened is that you do remember you've got those very sensitive
Mm,
gut lining, right? And we know that fermented foods not only got a lot of these fibers and the prebiotics, which is like
yeah,
fertilizer for the gut bacteria. So when we eat it, we produce loads of, pops of gas, which these nerve endings don't like, right? Because that's because they're so sensitive to that stomach, the expansion. When we get more gas in our gut, they trigger it and they get the gut symptoms in terms of the pain and the bloating and all that sort of stuff. And then as well as you're adding in like a whole lot of foreign extra live microorganisms, which can be a little bit more
yeah.
active.
So do they
So
battle?
I probably would assume that it's more of the fact that it's a fermented
Do they,
food. They do
they're like,
battle. They do battle. The ones that survive the acidic
right,
stomach. But the thing with fermented foods is that we can't really call them a probiotic because each batch, like if you make sauerkraut in Brisbane and then you make sauerkraut on the
different.
sunny coast, they'll have different types of microorganisms
Mm,
in, and each different bacteria and fungi and all the rest of it do different things. And that's, I guess, when we, probably don't have time to talk about this time because I think people probably have dinner and bed to go to. In the UK, they're probably at work. Is that each different type, does different things, which is why you should never just take any
yeah,
random probiotic because you don't know that you're taking the one with the right skills to do certain things. So in terms of how we deal with the fermented foods, if you're going through like these gut flares, I would just say unnecessary to have them right now. And once you've kind of gone on the rifaximin, you've kind of, taken away some of the bacteria that are doing extra excitement. And if you're feeling good, if it works for you, then after a couple of months, we're going to slowly start, like I'm talking
yeah,
tablespoons, 1 tablespoon every couple of days into your diet to teach your microbes how to deal with these new extra microbes, but also how to deal with the prebiotics. Because we've said it before that if you are on a diet and you have no chocolate at all, and then you're faced with all of this chocolate, most of us will binge and will overdo on the chocolate and we'll have a big party and feel a bit sick. And that's what the bacteria do with these prebiotics as well. So it's all about that slow, steady kind
yeah.
of gradual,
And I think what
gradual
you said to
intake.
me the other day, when I'm introducing and I'm at the stage where I'm only doing the tiniest little bit of the red cabbage stuff, whatever it is, sauerkraut. And yes, I do get bloated because I am also incorporating a little bit of the grains, like you said, like the 5 different things you want to start incorporating. And you don't have to do it all at once because that's probably too much, right? So maybe over time you do one and work on that and then get the next one. So you can feed the different types of bacteria because they all feed off different foods. Am I right? I don't know. You're probably just like, shut up.
100%. No, no, Abby,
Uh,
I'm very
and then
impressed in
over,
terms of what you've taken away because
I was going to say, dealing with a little bit of bloating is, I mean, it's going to happen because we're not used to eating those foods. It depends how bad it is. And I think just being in tune with your body and, if I'm really blown up, I go, okay, well, maybe I overdid the sauerkraut. Maybe I had too much of the wild rice in that sitting. And next time I'll go without the sauerkraut and sort of like go that way. But if you have a bit, it's just what's going to happen. It's like working a muscle at the gym. It takes time to build that muscle and for your body to know how to do a certain exercise, and then you have muscle memory. So we're doing that with the gut, right?
100%. That's the best analogy. You've absolutely nailed it. And I guess in terms of the bloating thing, it's also probably helpful to talk about that word that we mentioned last week, about the
Yes, I'm
abdominopharyngeal
picking that
dyssynergia,
book.
which is a very scientific word. But essentially, again, what happens if you have very sensitive gut lining? Because again, remember that gut-brain axis has been damaged, whether it was because of you got a gut infection historically or the trauma or whatever the reason is, these nerve endings are really sensitive. So if they sense a little bit of extra gas because they're incorporating some of these fermented foods or the prebiotics, what a normal gut would do is the diaphragm would actually open up to allow more room for your guts to expand because gas will
Yeah.
just expand it, right? So a normal gut will open, the diaphragm will kind of relax like that, go up, dome up, and your gut muscles subconsciously actually contract a little bit to keep the gut kind of in. So we've noticed this because we actually do these functional MRI gut scans, so we can actually have a look at how much gas is being, produced in the gut. So that's what would happen in a normal gut. But when you have the sensitive gut lining, this mechanism is dysfunctional, and literally the opposite happens. So the nerve endings sense that there's that little bit of gas there, and instead of the diaphragm pushing up to allow more room for that to kind of expand the gut, etc., it does the opposite. It stupidly flattens, and then in turn also your gut muscles relax. So that's why you get this huge protrusion in your gut. So it's not that you necessarily have got loads more gas produced than your husband or your partner who ate the exact same thing. It's a fact that your body's response to that little bit of extra gas from that food is dysfunctional. And then it all comes down to that underlying mechanism of that dysfunction between the gut and the brain. Those frustratingly sensitive nerves that is causing your body to do all of these reactions that is kind of the opposite of healthy and supportive. So that's kind of what's at play as well. So because if you eat something and you blow up straight away, don't always assume, oh, it must just be that food. We know that those nerve endings, yes, foods can exacerbate if that little bit of extra gas is produced, but also the nerves, if you've had less sleep that night, if you've received a stressful email, the kids are going off, all that sort of stuff will make these nerves even more sensitive. Caffeine makes them even more sensitive. So there's a lot at play there, and that's why we need to be really cautious of not just being like, okay, it was that food that caused that. When we are having these meals and doing the reintroduction.
So should I be removing my coffee? I have reduced the amount and it's like half strength now, but should I ideally?
Yeah. No, so in terms of caffeine, I wouldn't say you have to completely cut out caffeine.
It's my one vice.
And you have reduced down. So what I know, and that's why I say is that having, one shot of coffee a day is completely fine. If you are super, super sensitive, we do know that caffeine increases your stress hormone, cortisol. Some people are more sensitive to that, right? So it's about the individual. I would say if you're having 3 coffees a day and you're having all these really bad gut symptoms, try cut it down to 1 coffee and move the other 2 to decaf. Don't completely cut out, things altogether. Try decaf because that also can trick your brain a little bit as well. So you still get some of the taste and you don't feel as deprived. But probably try cut it down to 1. So I don't think that you need to cut it out altogether. I think just keeping to your 1 and then decaf is going to be completely fine. It's unlikely to have this effect size that's what's kind of causing your level of symptoms and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I don't think you need to go restricted. But that's what we tend to kind of feel like we need to do, and then we start to actually pull all these extra things out. And we know that, coffee, decaf is kind of very similar. They've got these plant chemicals which actually are beneficial and feed your gut bacteria. So in a healthy person, actually having 2 coffees a day is beneficial for gut health. But we know that there's the caffeine component. So food is a little bit more complex, annoyingly, than kind of we would like it to be.
So I saw a few people saying, so what do we do with the Sibo? I think we kind of covered it, but we talked about how I'm going to do the antibiotic that's targeted to the small intestine, and I'm going to try that, what's it called? The one, the anti...
Yeah, and then so you'd go through the first line strategies first and make sure it really is kind of SIBO, so to speak. So, you would look at things like having smaller, more frequent meals. Is it actually constipation that's causing these bloating and the cramping? So, make sure you don't just automatically go SIBO, because I think SIBO is probably over-diagnosed and overstated at the moment. Make sure you're not having a lot of these sugar-free sweeties, having loads of diet soft drinks and stuff like that. If you're having fruit, which is hugely beneficial, have that. Be cautious of the stevia. Some people, and have fruit. So have only 80 grams across the in 3 sittings across the day. So 80 grams, another 80 grams, instead of having, a whole punnet of
Yeah.
strawberries all at once. Being cautious of not having all these like really refined, like these strong fruit juices, because it's kind of just very concentrated fruit. Um, Other things is, making sure that the amount of fiber and the sources of fiber is really diverse. Anyway, it's in the
Yeah.
book. You can check that out. But I would try all the first line strategies first before
Yeah.
just going, I need to treat my SIBO. It's only, like Am in your scenario, it's been so many years of you struggling going through all that. So now we've realized, yes, it likely is going to be the SIBO.
Yeah.
So we want to trial the rifaximin. So you're going to go to your gastroenterologist, they will prescribe that, and it might be the 550 milligrams 3 times a day, or the 400 milligrams twice a day. And you would have that either for the 14 days or the 10 days, again, depending what your prescriber prefers. And then once you've done that, we would assess your symptoms over the next couple of weeks and see whether you're feeling better, if you're feeling good. And then we keep going in terms of, if you're feeling good, then actually we'll start to slowly reintroduce those super six plant groups in small amounts, like, a tablespoon of chickpeas every second day, all that sort of stuff. And then if you notice that actually you start to regress ever, then it might be a case of, okay, we might need to trial those neuromodulators in terms of reducing down that sensitivity, so we can then really go at it with the super six and really build up that bacterial diversity, so they can produce the things like the butyrate and the other types of chemicals that can help really desensitize and heal your gut, so to speak. So that's the process that we're going to kind of follow.
It's important that you guys go and see an actual doctor too, and not just look at what I'm doing or other people and go, oh, it's that, I'm going to treat myself. Because you can just, like I sort of did, and went running around trying to find things thinking, yeah, I'm good now. And then it comes back and I'm like, oh, got to start again. So you want to see someone that's reputable, which is hard to find, I know. That's why I had to go to Megan, who's over in the UK.
Yeah.
But then she's sort of like telling me, you need to go to the gastroenterologist, you need to go to the GP and get these tests done, and like all that sort of stuff. So once go and see the professionals, and then get something that is suited to you and personalized, and then you can get on your healing journey.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. Because, I think people go down all of these different journeys. They actually spend hundreds of dollars in supplements, and they spend hundreds of dollars, all these thousands, and the invalid tests. It's crazy.
I've had people, and I'm not going to like talk about who they were or anything, but there's been a few of them that wanted to charge me upwards of $20,000 to get treatment, and I was like, oh, and so many people
guys never
deal
do
with
that.
this, and I think, how on earth, like, I won't pay that, no one else is going to pay that, and they go on suffering. And that's why it's great that you're online giving out free information, because you genuinely care and you want people to get better. I mean, you've got to obviously make money. Like, I get it. You've got to make a living. You've got bills to pay.
Yeah. But go to the library and eat yourself healthy, because it does kind of talk through some of the basic things, which, like I said, I think a lot of people can end the suffering. And if someone is charging you through the roof of money, asking crazy amounts, just don't go down there. What I always say is, if you're seeing someone, make sure they have a body that they have to abide by, right? So, it might be the Accredited Practicing Dietitian Association, or, it might be the GMC, the Medical Association. Make sure there is someone that is accountable for what they're saying, because, if I do something that's not evidence-based, I can lose my license. And that keeps people, obviously there can still be some charlatans within every industry, but it kind of means that it's more well regulated and people aren't going to be doing dodgy things. I think that is probably a really important.
It's so
and then
hard
check that, if someone suggests doing something.
Sorry, keep going. I can wait.
I was gonna say, if someone suggests doing something, I always say to them, ask, has there been a human clinical trial that has shown a benefit? And get them to actually send you showing that there's been a benefit, not in a rat, but in a human. And if they don't have that, then actually there's probably not the science there, and therefore it's, you know, a little bit dodgy. And if you've got all the money in the world, you know, maybe it's not going to be too bad doing it, but very few of us do. So I would always ask that information before you hand over your money.
So there's one question here I just want to talk about. So I have seen gastroenterologists in the past, and I have had 2 colonoscopies, which is a camera up the bum, over the last, like, say, 5 years.
Good, we all need them.
That's because I do have a family history of it as well, and also I'm trying to get to the bottom of it, pun intended. So what happened is I did it. They didn't find anything. I got very sick from the stuff I had to drink, by the way, throwing up and hallucinating, just the stuff that you had to drink to clean your bowels out. And then the gastroenterologist said to me, like, we didn't find anything. And I said, okay, well, what do I do? I've got issues. Like, I've had them for decades. And there's no answer. And I said, well, I've been looking into the fecal matter transplant, where they get, hopefully, fecal matter from a healthy person and implant it into, is it even in the small intestines? I don't know where they put it, but implant it into in the large
intestine.
Okay. I thought it was they actually put it in the small, and I was like, what? That would be horrific now that I think about it. But yeah, he basically said, like, you could look into getting a fecal matter transplant. So I was like, okay. And I was looking around, and I was almost going to, because you're desperate, right? And you think it's the only option.
Yeah, of course. I mean, they sounded like they're legit, which is frustrating that someone who should know better was recommending something that hasn't been, you know, robustly tested yet.
Have benefited from it. Thank goodness they got it from someone that was actually healthy with no diseases and whatever else. And from my understanding is if you take poop from someone who is obese and put it in a person who is not, they actually start gaining weight, because our microbiome that does so much. So you can explain more on this and why you don't like the fecal matter transplant.
So fecal matter, and then just after this, I think we better close it off, because I actually do need to go and also see some patients soon. But yes, FMT, it's like this huge hot topic, and actually it's been done in a lot of big teaching hospitals for a number of years for actually curing people with a very serious gut infection called C. difficile. So that's where actually we do have really good scientific evidence. So people who don't react to or don't respond to antibiotics, and they keep relapsing on antibiotics, and they've got this C. diff infection, they have these fecal transplants, and it cures like 95% of people. Like, it's incredibly powerful. So from that, researchers have now started to go, oh, well, that works really well. What about in IBS? What about in inflammatory bowel disease? You know, can we have that same benefit? So it's now at the stages of testing in these different scenarios. But like you highlighted, there are so many risks attached, because, for example, some of the earlier studies are suggesting, if you get the microbiome of someone who might have a family history even of depression, there is a chance, mostly this has come from animal studies in terms of the evidence, but you could transplant that, right? And it's like, okay, well, I got rid of my IBS, but maybe I've contracted, you know, an increased risk of depression. Same with metabolic function and weight management and stuff like that. There is mostly animal studies, again, because we don't want to be doing this in humans yet. You can transplant, you know, genes or the bacteria that are more likely to predispose someone to being of a high body weight. So there is a lot of risks involved. So what I always say is that talk to your doctor and see if there's any clinical trials going around. I do know that there is some really robust evidence coming out for ulcerative colitis, which is a type of inflammatory bowel disease. So do talk to your gastroenterologist about that.
It's just gone, oh, there you are. You did go out for a bit, but I can hear you now. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Sorry. Someone was trying to call me. I think I do need to go to clinic. But so yes, ulcerative colitis could be something worth investigating. There is a couple of in IBS, and for every positive study in IBS, there's also a negative study, i.e. no benefit. And what it's looking like and what it's looking like is probably like these super donors. So research is now happening to kind of refine what should be in these transplants, and they're going to, instead of having to insert the poop up the back end from the healthy person to someone with the condition, they're going to put them into capsules. So The research is still underway. I will obviously let you guys know as soon as there is any kind of robust evidence out there that's now commercialized. But at this stage, I would be very cautious, unless it's part of a clinical trial,
Thank you.
to go down the fecal
We're going to
transplant
go
route.
because we've been talking a long time. But guys, I highly recommend getting Megan's book. You can head to her Instagram page. You can go on there. You've got it in the link tree, do you? And get it. It's so informative.
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
got it
it'll be
downstairs
there.
on my
Yeah.
table. The kids are like, "That's a big book." I'm like, "Yeah." Yeah. So thank you so much, Megan, and thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you got something from it. We obviously can't cover everything because it's such a huge topic, but yeah, hopefully you got something from it. But Megan's always sharing info, and she's about to pop, by the way. She's having a baby soon. So thank you so much. Yeah,
Any day. So yeah, but fingers crossed. Got a couple of weeks to go. See you guys. Thanks so much.
Guys. Bye, Megan. Bye, everyone.